Hi there. So this mini lecture is looking at the 30-mark essay. So if we start off by reading the item in the question, and I can talk through some of the common errors, and then we'll have a look at why this essay generally scored quite well. So sociologists agree that education transmits ideas and values. However, they disagree about the nature of these ideas and values and who benefits from this process. For example, feminists argue that education transmits patriarchal ideology, and this benefits men. Other sociologists argue that the education system has become fragmented and transmits a diverse range of ideas and values. The question is asking you to apply material from item B and your knowledge, evaluate the sociological explanations of the role of education in transmitting ideas and values. And this is what you have to keep on linking back to do well, okay? The idea is the main role of education to transmit ideas and values, okay? It does appear that this is a role of education essay. It's asking you to say, oh, what is the role of education? However, some of you, and actually quite a number of you, were sort of lulled into saying, well, functionalists think the role of education is this, Marxists think the role of education is this, feminists think the role of education is that, and postmodernists disagree because of this. However, what you were not so good at was linking it back to, therefore, education does or doesn't transmit ideas and values. And the other way you could kind of create some type of debate is, as it says in the item, okay, what is the nature of these ideas and values and who benefits from this, okay? That was where the debate came from predominantly. Like I said, yes, this essay in particular scored quite well. Apologies for the fact that the scan's gone a bit funny on this page particularly, but I can talk you through the comments in the corner that you can't quite read. Just before we get started, one of the main things that AQA was looking for this in the summer was the chain of reasoning. It kept on coming up again and again and again. And this essay generally had reasonably good chain of reasoning. Okay, so let's get started to reading it. So the introduction. Different sociologists argue about the explanations of the role of education. Marxists, which I've underlined to put a T because it's theoretical perspective, for example, believe that the ideas and the values that are transmitted through education are the ideas and values of the ruling class. That's what I've kind of said is weak application because they're using the language of the question, but it's not very developed. It's just an introduction. I wouldn't expect it to be developed. However, functionalists, another theory, would argue that the ideas and values transmitted by education is that of social solidarity. That's a concept, not very well explained, but again, just an introduction. Even though they disagree over the role of these ideas, again, weak application referring to ideas and values, sociologists do agree that they are transmitted through education. So kind of giving an outline of where the argument's going to go. Generally, your introductions were quite weak across the board, and they were like that when I marked this in the summer. They didn't really add a whole lot of value. And this is very good. It's quite succinct. It's not very long, okay? But it does end up repeating what's already said in the rest of the essay as well. So we have a quick look at the first paragraph, which is a bit skewiff. So it said functionalists would argue that the role of education is transmitting ideas and values to create social solidarity. Okay, so that again is quite clear application, transmitting ideas and values to create social solidarity. This then creates a value consensus, again another key term, hence the C for concept in society. And the workforce, which is key in society, will all share the same ideas and values. However, that wasn't a very well developed application. At this point, this essay did not explain how we all end up with the same shared values. It didn't really explain how it benefited everyone in society. So they didn't really talk very much about what education did. The point then goes on to talk about Schultz's ideas about human capital. Schultz argued that human capital concept is key for any workplace, and so education must provide a highly skilled workforce. He argues that this then justifies spending lots of money on education because it's an investment in the economy. Completely right. However, the problem is that is actually a different function, and many of you missed out on this opportunity to create debate within functionalism. The first function, they're right about creating, transmitting values to generate social solidarity and value consensus. That's one side of education. However, the idea that education is there to create a skilled workforce, that's a different function. That's not about ideas. That's not about values. So they missed out on a chance to create a bit of evaluation, saying, actually, you know what? The main function is actually to create human capital. So I've said that's different function. So then goes on to say, functionalists also argue that within education there is ascribed status versus achieved status. That's kind of a concept linked to Parsons' ideas, even though they haven't referred to it, whereby pupils are born with status, e.g. from middle-class families, but may not keep this status in education. This isn't a very clear point, but they get there in the end. This is because schools teach that status needs to be achieved, and this also occurs within the school peer group. This idea, because they've referred to idea, prepares students for the workforce because it's the idea that status must be worked for, so they value hard work. So there's application at the end, and the annotation you've missed off from the left, I've said concept question mark. Clearly they're talking about meritocracy here, but they haven't referred to it explicitly. So this point, the functionalist argument, the first two, they're actually the weakest points in the whole essay. We go on now, we look at the Marxist argument at the bottom, which is even more blurry, but hopefully you've got your physical copy of this, so you'll be able to follow it in your version. On the other hand, Marxists would disagree with the functionalist idea that status is not ascribed but achieved, as they believe education transmits the ideas of the ruling class. Fantastic, clear chain of reasoning, and it's also evaluation, just saying how they disagree with them. Creates a nice clear chain. Ideas of the ruling class, again, got a bit of application there. Language of the question. This is due to the fact that the national curriculum favours a ruling class ideology. For example, in English they study Shakespeare and poetry, and in music they cover classical music. This benefits the middle class students because they will be more likely to have encountered such things as Shakespeare due to their cultural capital. That's a concept, and so the middle class will do better in education and the working class will not. This ensures that the working class will be controlled by the middle class in the workplace as they end up in the more qualified, high-paying managerial jobs. This is accepted by Marxist Althusser, ST for study. Althusser argues because of the ideological state apparatus, another concept, which controls the working class and transmits ideas and beliefs associated with keeping the ruling class in power. So we start to see application again here. Above there, all that section about the fact that the middle class does better because of cultural capital, that it's a bit descriptive in places and isn't very focused on the question, but there is also an element of analysis in that section, so I have credited them for analysis, even though you can't see it on the left-hand side. But this is where the application gets good. As such, the working class don't question their failure. They see it as self-inflicted. This benefits the ruling class as the workers are not aware of their oppression by the ruling class. Okay, so the final few lines there, when they start to talk about the fact that it's ideas and beliefs keeping the ruling class in power, they then explain it because they don't question their failure. That's the idea they end up with. It's a really strong application point back to the question. So now if we go on to the next page. Okay, hopefully that's clear for you. So it says, however, feminists would disagree with the Marxist idea that the ruling class ideology is transmitted through education and instead argue that, in fact, it's a patriarchal ideology. I felt that this wasn't as strong a chain as the previous points. That's why I said weak chain, but they are trying to create a link between their arguments, which is good. It's a logical argument, as referred to in the item. Feminists argue that the ideas and values that instill patriarchy in society begin in education, due to the fact that boys get more attention than girls by teachers, as studied by Dale Spender. I should have underlined that as a study. This passes on the idea that boys are seen as more important and girls are not. And it's quite analytical at that point. Even though it's brief, it is analytical because it's explaining the idea. Furthermore, many factors within school instill the patriarchal ideology onto the students. This includes gendered language, whereby male teachers are called sir and female teachers are called miss, which suggests the idea that men are more powerful. So that's application, and it's also analysis because they're explaining gendered language using an example. This idea, again, application, because it's using the word idea, is also enforced in gendered subjects, which includes the PE curriculum, where girls are encouraged to do dance and gymnastics, and boys are given the opportunity to play cricket or rugby. These all instill a patriarchal ideology onto the pupils, and so when they go into the world of work, they have the belief that men are more important and more powerful than women. This benefits men. So that's clear application because it's about beliefs again. And I really like that example talking about the PE curriculum and the fact they've linked it back to how that creates the idea that girls aren't as good, strong, quick, fast, as powerful as men. Comparatively, postmodernists would disagree with Marxists and feminists. So at that point, it's quite weak chain, but it gets better later on. Because as seen in the item, clear use of the item, they believe that the education is transmitting a diverse range of ideas and values that don't benefit anyone. So that's kind of straight from the item. Okay, so I can't give that application. Nevertheless, it does help develop the chain. Okay, because the previous arguments have said the values benefit certain groups in society. Postmodernists would argue that due to the many changes to the education over the last few decades, society has moved from a modern to a postmodern world, whereby class and gender do not matter. So that line is evaluation, not very well developed, so I've done weak evaluation, but again, it's part of the chain of reasoning linking back to previous feminist and Marxist points. In regards to education, postmodernists believe that education is now available to anyone, and so education cannot transmit ideas and beliefs that favour one group in society. For example, people can now, that should say go, not do, to school, college or university at any age. And so this provides the opportunity for people who missed out on education when they were younger to experience it at a later age. And this is the evaluation, it's very developed. This rejects the Marxist idea that people are stuck where they are in the workforce due to the ideological state apparatus. Again, clear chain link back to Louis Althusser idea. As gaining an education at a later age means that people can move into higher positions within the workforce. So I must admit, I've never seen that argument before, but I think it's a really good point to make, and they have explained it very well. Furthermore, postmodernists would also argue that because identity has become more fragmented, there are no longer gendered subjects. Again, that's a chain of reasoning back up to the feminist point, and this is good evaluation, again, developed. There's no longer gender subjects because in a postmodern society, people are more open to the idea of boys doing dance and girls doing rugby without being labelled negatively by their peers. This means education cannot transmit the patriarchal ideology that girls are delicate and boys are tough. Clearly, there is a diverse range of ideas and values being transmitted. Very clear application. So the conclusion, I must admit, this is one that I've written because the original one wasn't as strong and most conclusions weren't that fantastic across the board. If it's going to make a good conclusion, guys, you've got to kind of come to a judgment and you've got to support it with some evidence without just rewriting the essay. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. And I know it sounds awful. Sometimes you're better off just writing a fourth or even a fifth point than just sticking in a conclusion when you just rewrite what you've already said, because it's not going to add anything new. So here we go. Overall, it is clear that sociologists have opposing view in the role of education. Clearly, as an institution, its main function is to both socialise students into shared norms and values application, but also has an economic function of creating an effective workforce, be that a skilled workforce that functionalists argue education produces, or the docile workforce that Marxists argue education creates. So a little bit of evaluation there between the two perspectives. However, in today's postmodern economy, we need highly creative and skilled workers. This plus increased testing and examination suggests that education is less about ideas and values and more about creating Schultz's human capital, suggesting there is another functionalist view on the role of the education. And that again links back to the Schultz point in the very first point that we looked at. So I really like that, and well, I must say that because I wrote it, but it supported the judgment with something a little bit new about the increased testing. Here are my comments. I've sort of said to you already. The functionalist point is very weak in this essay. It's not very well applied compared to the rest of it, and it doesn't recognise that the human capital is a different function to the socialisation function. The rest of the essay has a good chain of reasoning throughout, and that's one of its biggest strengths and why it was able to get into the top band. Generally well applied, although in some places application to ideas and values is implicit. But I really like the evaluation using postmodernism in this case. Okay, I was really impressed by that. And the clear judgment in the conclusion helped push it into the sort of lower part of the top band. To make this a stronger essay, I would have made sure the functionalist point was better applied, and I would have made sure that my points and my chain of reasoning was a bit clearer throughout. But generally, a really good essay. Thinking more generally about some of the weaknesses across the board, Stu, you guys are still kind of using juxtaposition evaluation. So if I've written juxta, that's because you're not really creating that chain of reasoning. And if it is like that, or you've just got stated evaluation, it interrupts the chain of reasoning. So the maximum you can get is 18. Likewise, some of you did just do a role of education essay with no application to the ideas, beliefs, values element of the question. That meant that you couldn't get higher than 18, or because there was no, it was almost list-like, it wasn't relevant to what the question was talking about. And as I've already mentioned, introductions and conclusions generally added little value across the board. One thing that one area I probably wouldn't have discussed, because a couple of you did, lots of lengthy points on the new right view of education and how marketisation was really good for education and how that was going to create a much more efficient education system. And effectively, those points are quite tangential. They're not really focused on the question. I'd struggle to link the new right view that marketisation was great into the idea of beliefs and values. So that generally was irrelevant, okay? Anyway, so if you have a read of this, add the annotations, and have a go at improving your own one based on what we've talked about here. Thank you.